Hello and welcome to the show. I'm your host, Leanne Hughes, and I'm here to help you design fast, deliver strong without stress. I want to outline, as part of the reflection and capture process of writing a book, some of the similarities between writing a book and designing a workshop. I don't think we really acknowledge how creative it is to actually design a workshop or design a book. There's so many ideas, parts of information, ways that we can go. And so there's a lot of decision points as well. So I really wanted to sort of capture, these are my notes, by the way, for the solo episode, if you are watching, that I'm going to riff off in this today. If you are listening to the podcast and not watching this on YouTube, just letting you know that I am running a bit of an experiment here. Something I talk about in my book, the 2-Hour Workshop Blueprint, that will be released next week. This is the final week of June. It's going to be out. So jump onto bookhelp.leannehughes.com if you want to get notified, or leannehughes.com/subscribe, because I'm going to do some, in the first week of launch, I'm really sort of aiming for a lot of verified reviews. Something I talk about in the book, The 2-Hour Workshop Blueprint, is the importance of stepping away from the computer when you're designing your session. And Leanne, First Time Facilitator Leanne, would do the opposite. So if I was called in to design a workshop, I would jump straight onto an open PowerPoint. I had this assumption that a presentation equaled PowerPoint. I jump in there, change the headings, change the bullet points, move things around, add some images, and that was my design. And I advise against that now. So the experiment that I'm doing right now is I'm sitting in my living room. I've walked away from the computer. I've set up a little mobile recording studio, which is quite fun. I guess it's more relaxed and it feels like more of a conversation, even though you're not there live. I feel like we're having a chat around what are these decision points for the design. So let's jump in right now, riffing on the decision points between writing a book and also facilitating a workshop. Now, number one is a decision on what is the workshop going to be about? What is your book going to be about? I'm going to start with the book first. So when it comes to nonfiction, and by the way, I'm not the expert on writing books. This is just coming from my own experience based on the last sort of 6 months. Plus, I guess prior to that, maybe 3 or 4 years of wanting to write a book and just not doing it. So when I talk about decision points, these are points where it's easy to either stop, pause, or go. And hopefully when I share this stuff with you, it's helping you to propel and actually go forward as opposed to just pausing. Although there's a time and place for that, of course. And sometimes we can't push these decisions. I'll talk more about that in a second. But the first one is our decision point on what is the book going to be about? What is your workshop going to be around? And I think for me, there's 2 different types of books that you can write. One is where you're exploring. You're not really sure. You're using the book as a way to figure out your response to a certain topic. For example, I might want to write a book around the impact of AI on facilitation. Like, I don't know the answer to that yet, but as I write the book and I start talking to people and exploring, I might decide on, okay, here's the scope and here's what I think about this. But it's kind of loose. It's like, I've got this idea in mind. Who knows where it's going to take me, but I'm going to use a process of dedication, of daily discipline, of writing to figure that out. It's kind of like when you journal something. Like, I know sometimes when I journal in the morning, I know that I've got these thoughts in my head, but when I write things down, it's quite different to what I was actually anticipating. I feel like the first type of book is like a surprise type of book. You've got an idea in mind, but it could go somewhere else. And the second type of book, which is the 2-Hour Workshop Blueprint for me, is actually using the book as a container for all the information that you've accumulated as well, like kind of bookending a process, bookending a part of your life and celebrating that. And this is what the book is for me. The 2-Hour Workshop Blueprint is really around capturing what were the highlights, what did I really learn from a lot of these podcast conversations, like since graduating from First Time Facilitator, what have been the biggest insights or most practical takeaways? So, I mean, the example is that I'd get messages on LinkedIn from experts, like subject matter experts saying, hey, I'm running a short workshop in 2 weeks. Like, what do I need to do? And there was no single one podcast episode that captured all of that. And I don't think you could capture all of that in one episode. You could capture like a rough framework, but really like diving into what you need to do, the mindset around like getting yourself ready, how you can quickly put something together that actually turns your expertise into something that is engaging, and how you can use questions and things like that. It actually needed to be a book. So that's the reason I went for this. A lot of people are asking me, like, why the 2-hour workshop? Like, why are you helping people create a 2-hour workshop? Well, one thing was funny in California was that I actually had someone run up to me at this conference that Andy Storch held, the Talent Management Development Think Tank Conference. And she's like, oh my gosh, Leanne, I have to run a 2-hour workshop in 2 weeks. This is like the perfect book. So I love that it was like, it just solves a headache. But I feel like if you can run a 2-hour workshop, you can run an all-day workshop. You can run a 30-minute session. it's actually applicable. The process for creating a 2-hour workshop is the same whether you're running an all-day session, but it covers all the parts in just the right detail that you need. So that's why I did it. Plus, of course, I love Nick Gray's book, The 2-Hour Cocktail Party. And what I love about that is I got to the end of it. It was pragmatic. I got checklists. I knew exactly what I needed to do in order to create this. So I wanted to create that same experience just in the context of workshops. So that's number one, is a decision point on what type of book is it? Is it a future you book where you're exploring and researching and figuring it out? Or is it a, let's just capture my knowledge. I feel like I've done enough curating and exploring, and I just want to capture this so it's helpful for someone else. Now, how this relates to workshop design is we're all going in thinking, and I think that this is kind of the difference between training and facilitation is like book one. It's you're going in, you've got some processes and ideas, but you don't know where it could possibly go. That emerges through the conversation. And the second one is more like training, where it's like, I've got the expertise, I want to share it, I'm going to contain it, and this is the way that we do that. Now, you can do training in an interactive way, of course, but yeah, I think that's the difference between facilitation and training is like the books. Number one, let's explore this. I'm not really sure where this will go, but we've got some processes to help map us through, but things could emerge that move this in a different direction, which is what we have to be open for. But the second one, training, is more about these are the specific skill sets, is what we're going to really focus on and drive in this session. Okay, let's move to point number 2, which is the scope. Like, I think it's the hardest thing to do for both workshops and book writing. And I found, I mean, it's funny because when I design a workshop, I put so much in, and it's something I talk about in the book is like, actually, the key is you want to get someone a result. You want to get your group to a destination. The information is out there already. So your workshop is not about the information. It's what are you cutting out to curate the result. Now, especially in a 2-hour workshop, right? You can't give everything, but you've really got to think about what are the 3 most significant things here that will help lead someone to this, and let's just cut out everything else. And I talk about them creating a mini mission statement for your workshop. So that provides the criteria. It's like the purpose for the session. So anything that kind of falls outside that scope, you've got to get rid of. You've got to trim. Same with the book. Now, it's funny. I think my friend Steph was reading the first version of the book, and she's like, Leanne, you talk about cutting out content, but there's way too much information in here. So it's a total trap. It happens all the time. And it's actually really nice to have trusted friends and advisors that can tell you like, hey, like you're giving this stuff, you think it's valuable. Maybe we can put it in bonus content or somewhere else, like on a podcast, so that we keep people really on that drive to the result that they're after and help them get those small wins. Because a lot of this is actually about helping to reduce the overwhelm as well. I find when like picking scope, one of the fun things to do is to ask a question, what am I standing against? Like, what is this book against? And for me with workshop design is I want to stand against overthinking and just putting way too much time and energy into this. Like, we do it because stakes are high. We don't want to embarrass ourselves. Like, I know exactly why I try to overcompensate with planning and everything else. But there comes a point where it just isn't helpful. It's not adding anything to it, right? So what are you standing against? For this book, I'm standing against just overthinking, over-deliberating and things like that. So in order to do that, like I wanted to role model that in even the way that I wrote the book. So the book came out very quickly. Basically, the version 1 was out within 52 days. I started writing it on the 1st of January. My inner dialogue was I don't want to go to California without a book. So it happened very quickly. And I'll talk through a bit of the process through this conversation, and maybe as also like behind the scenes. If you buy the book in launch week, I'll do a behind the scenes of the book writing process. But really, I had no time to procrastinate. and because it was a book, like the second type of book where I have all this idea already, now let's just get it down there. But to have the scope is really important. Like the enemy of this is overthinking. So how can my process really role model what I'm trying to express as well? The irony is something I mentioned in the book is if you're running a session on time management, make sure that you finish the workshop on time. You know what I mean? It's like a meta way of really living the content that you're sharing in the session. It's also really helpful to validate what that scope is before you really continue. So like I said, when I had someone in California running up and say, oh, I got to deliver a 2-hour workshop, that was just immediate. The book was flying off the desk at the conference, like so many people were just grabbing a copy. So that also validated like the cover and everything else that was done again really quickly. My friend Jade Miller has done all these amazing illustrations in the book, and just it's a joyful book to pick up. And that's what I wanted, that feeling, because workshop design should be a joy. The work that we do is joyful. The honor that we get to be part of these groups and helping them create something or spark an insight. Like I said before, having an enemy is good. So overthinking. So what's the outcome within the book? What I want people to do is like be able to deliver a 2-hour workshop following this, but also something tactile that they work through as part of the book is creating a run sheet. So I call this the Spark sheet. Spark is an acronym I use. It's the framework that underpins everything in the book. You're having their Spark sheet, you have that as the output. Same in your workshop. Like, what is that tangible, the output that someone will get as a result of attending your 2-hour session? Like something that they can just like grab on and latch onto and run away with. Number 3 is the medium is the message. What I mean by that is in a workshop, you have nuance, right? You have a conversation, you can answer questions, you can facilitate discussions, you can be led in different directions depending on what the group needs. Now, in a book, once it's finalized, it's out there. So how much information is enough? What is not enough? What do you need to keep out? This is where I found the process of writing my book using a co-creation method was like the best. I read a book called Write Useful Books by Rob Fitzpatrick, and he talks about getting early beta readers. And he has a platform called Help This Book. So I signed up. I'm still a member of this community. It's been extremely helpful along the way. And so, I mean, reaching out for support and engaging coaches and paying for programs, I couldn't recommend more highly. Like I said, version 1 was out very quickly in 52 days. And then I opened it up for feedback. So I had the manuscript and people went through and they highlighted and said things like, hey, you repeated this, or like, we get it, Leanne, which is kind of funny because I talk about brevity and assuming that your audience are intelligent, yet there is a temptation in writing a book to like have to explain things. So when the medium is a message, again, like probably what I found hard was like, gosh, what actually stays in here? I don't know if I've nailed it. What I have done is created like bonus content for readers so they can watch videos, like how to give specific instructions for an activity, like really walks them through that. In a book, like I said, the medium is a message. It's really hard to lay that out in a way that doesn't just go on for pages and pages of like adding that nuance to it as well. And I think within our workshops, like the parallel between that is we do have more space in workshops. So with your design is you're creating a container, you have an idea, you've got a process, you've got some like backup resources and activities that your group might do, but it's also the luxury of a workshop, I think, is that you actually can get to be more flexible and see what is required or not and ask people in real time. They're there. That's the joy of workshops, is you get that opportunity to respond and be responsive. And I think that's a real skill of any workshop host. The other thing I had to do was really distill my framework and simplify it so much more than before. So I ran a 2-hour workshop blueprint masterclass last year. And one of the underpinning factors is creating a framework for your workshop. So I've got a framework for my book, like I said, the Spark framework, but for your own workshop is actually creating your own framework. And when we did this in the masterclass, we had the opportunity, if we had like thinking time, breakout time, I'd explain a few different ways to do that. But in the book, I don't have that luxury of having all these options. And again, I don't want it to go for pages and pages. So I thought, how do I simplify this? And it helps having friends that you can idea spar off. And you want to be able to explain your framework, of course, so it's easy. And when I was explaining it, I remember catching up with Jade in January for a coffee and I was just in this murky middle, like how do I progress this chapter about frameworks? Because it's like actually impossible to write because I don't have that nuance of being able to explain it. I've got to write this down in like a linear way, right? And I can use illustrations, but it's still really hard. And Jay's like, Leanne, let's just keep it simple. Let's just have 3 main topics of focus. And then I was like, oh yeah, cool. Once we have 3, then we can move on and provide other examples like later on and other resources. But for the 2-hour workshop, it really encourages you to distill what you're trying to share under the umbrella of 3 key things. Now, this could be presented through a Venn diagram or through columns or 3 buckets or 3 steps. But really, the magic number is 3, which is funny because it's called the 2-hour workshop. So there you go. But 3 key things. And by distilling it and really pulling it back, it just made the whole reading process and hopefully following the framework a lot easier for the reader as well. But also, if you're a more advanced facilitator and you want a different type of framework, you can incorporate that too. So yes, the medium is a message. I think about that experience of readers that are going through it. It's a self-directed thing when you read it. Is it making sense? And getting beta readers and feedback really helps to make sure that you're on the right track and that you're filling the gaps that you need, but not doing it so much that you're over explaining it. Number 4 is just getting the discipline to sit down and write the damn thing. So similar to workshop design. Now I'll start with workshop design before I go to book in a second, but I know with workshop design is like you've got the session that's coming up, it could be in a few months, or even a couple of weeks, and it's in your mind and you're out for a run or you're driving your car and it's on your shoulders and you're thinking about it and you start seeing things that you could possibly pluck and pull into your design. And this is like the divergent stage where you're like, oh, getting all these ideas. But there comes a point, I think Zaretta and I spoke about this on the podcast episode with her, where you've actually just got to like land it. You've actually got to sit down, take the time and the discipline to write it, because it won't write itself. I had a lot of great advisors. My friend Brendan, who's written 2 books, he's like, Leanne, just go to a cafe, just sit down, put yourself in a great environment. And that actually really worked. I didn't use that all of the time, but I've designed workshops in the same way, where I've just like taken post-it notes, stepped away from the screen, much like I'm doing with today's podcast, stepping away, getting out, getting natural light and just writing. Now, I think it's also figuring out what is a good format for you, what works best. So audio works well for me. Sometimes I was out there just talking through things, and then stories would emerge and metaphors would emerge as I was on the go that I could capture. At the same time, you can do all these things, like make it fun for yourself, but you've still just got to write it and get that fluency. And there's so many better people that are, that do this, that have advice in terms of how to write. For me, I wasn't aiming for a word limit. It was more about enough is enough. In fact, I wanted like the less words, the better, because I wanted to give readers the feeling of accomplishment when they finish the book. So the book is about 27,000 words. I think most published books, in terms of nonfiction, if you look at that type of style, are usually around the 50,000 mark, but they kind of like ramped up with too many case studies and things that take you off track just to fatten the book. I didn't want that. I wanted to be like, this is the resource, just work through it. And everything here is really important as a tool. The parallels between writing a book and designing work, the same thing. Like, you have to sit down, you got to actually work through the run sheet, you got to figure out the flow, you've actually got to get your resources, pack them, like do the work, land it, plant it. All the ideas in the world are great, but it's all about the execution and getting it done. And there's times where you oscillate between both. And I think here the most important thing is momentum and daily consistency of just sitting down and even just setting a timer. I've got this, I think it's called the big stopwatch on the Apple Mac. It's like $5 for it, and it's just this big stopwatch on the screen that just sit down and do 20 minutes. And once you get in that flow state, then you'll keep writing. But yeah, I think the hardest part for writing the book was actually just sitting down. Writing it down is very different to editing. So I would have different sessions where I was like, all right, this is just a pure writing session. Just write crap. It doesn't matter. Just get it out. Just write anything. We're going for fluency here, right? And don't stop. Just keep going for 20 minutes, have that break and keep going again. And then there was dedicated days for editing, which I'd go back and go, that doesn't sound great, and fix things up too. While it's creative and fun and all of that, like it is, I don't want to discount the actual tough work it is to just sit there in isolation, you and your screen, and tap it out. Like your workshop design, like go for fluency, go for like capture all those ideas, put them in post-it notes, but then there comes a stage where you got to consolidate it, really scale it back and go, is what we're doing here driving the result that we're after, driving what the client is after as well. And I suggest, particularly with a 2-hour workshop, you have to be ruthless. With a book, same thing. I think the key is reader engagement and helping them actually get mini wins, quick wins as they work the way through what you're writing. Number 5 is, I haven't really given these 5 key points specific terms. What has been really interesting is actually how hard it is to release this to the world. I think out of everything that I've done, this last 10%, 20%, maybe it isn't even that, but has been the toughest part. It's interesting because so many book authors say, like writing the book is like, that's the easy part and marketing it is the tough part. And I thought, no, like I really enjoy marketing. But as the closer I get to release day and actually doing it, I don't know, it's just, it seems a lot harder. It's like when I don't know if you run, but the last kilometer or the last 500 meters is the hardest. You're so close to the finish line. That extra effort, and there's also that thought of I should be putting everything into this. But there's something about just like completing and finishing. And we always like really talk about the start. Something that hit me, Tim Ferriss was talking to Derek Sivers in a podcast interview. And rather than calling it a book launch, he's calling it a book release in his own mind. He's like, there comes a point in time where you just have to release your work into the world and let whatever happens happen. It's a release. Like it's been under my wing for this year, and now I'm releasing it to the world. And I think even though I love working in public and sharing openly, and it's easy to share version 1, like everyone's like, oh wow, like good on you for doing this. But version 1 is easy because it wasn't the final version. And now it's like, well, this is the final version. A lot of authors tell me that after they've released a book, they go back and like, oh, I could have changed this and everything else. And look, there's opportunity to do that with future versions. But then you go back to the first decision that you made, like, is this the book I should have written? And then you go back to the second thing that I mentioned. Did I scope it correctly? You've made decisions on these months ago. And then as you're going back to release it, you're like, oh, should I have done this? And can I have added this? It's so interesting. And I think it comes with when it comes to workshop design and like that endlessly tweaking slides, like the day of, the morning of, there's always going to be new moments of inspiration. But once a workshop is done, it's done. And once a book is out, it's out. It's a release of that. And I think any of us who are creators, which is all of you that are listening to this and watching this, is you're creating something out of just these ideas and inspiration, you're delivering it. And congratulations to you. Like, it's courageous to do that. There's so many choices and ways that we can go. The deadline is probably the best thing that we can have, actually. Like, if we didn't have a deadline, if we didn't know when our workshop was coming up, like, would we stop the tweaking? I really do believe in what Jocko Willink has to say, and that constraints and discipline sets you free. The goal of this book was really to cut out the overthinking, and to do that, it helps to have a process to follow, and also constraints on what your agenda can look like. Just to like prop in your mind that actually let's work within these constraints, and that cuts out so much of the decision fatigue as well. So deadlines are great. Designing is super creative, so good on you for doing it. And making decisions are what really propels us forward across all of these 5 different touch points. So let me just review what they were. So number 1 was making a decision on the style of book that you're writing. Is it for a future you where you're curious, like a facilitator, or is it more about capturing your expertise like a trainer? Number 2 is the scope of what you're doing. So who is the reader? What is the topic? What is the result that you're really gunning for? And what are you standing against? Number 3 is really figuring out the medium is the message. So how do you get what your thoughts are and make it easy? So for an example, in a book that it's self-directed and doesn't require the nuance of conversation and questions. Whereas in a workshop, you've got that luxury of being a bit more looser with your design so that you can capture and create the space for those conversations and questions to emerge. Number 4 is just sit in the damn seat and write it. Like, there comes a point where you've got all the divergent thinking and you just have to plant it and land it and let it converge through either your workshop run sheet and the design that you're doing, or the book that you're writing is actually just getting those words down. And number 5 is just keep in mind that as you approach that finish line, as you see it in sight, things start to get a little bit harder. You start questioning things as you're trying to sprint towards that line. So just be prepared for that. I don't really know what the advice is for that. I don't know if you can mitigate it against it. I think it's a fine thing, a natural thing. It's just being okay with it, shrugging it off and going, look, I made these decisions. This is it. Let's move forward. Don't let it hold me back, and really put your head down and just bolt through that finish line. And for your workshops as well, you don't need to mindlessly tweak. You've got that space to make changes as you go. For a book, it's actually final. So yeah, it's a bit of a finish line. Okay, that's it for me for the show. Let me know what you thought. If you're watching the video, thank you so much. If you're listening on the podcast, what I will do is on the podcast next week, I'll provide details on how you can grab it. For the first week, I'm really aiming for over 50 verified reviews from around the world. I just want to build that social proof. So there'll be a few different bonuses and activities in terms of webinars that I'll be running as well, to really capture that. Let me know what you thought about this episode. Either share a comment on YouTube or send me an email, hello@leannehughes.com, connect on LinkedIn, Instagram at Leanne Hughes, all those places as well. Thank you so much for being here. I hope this helped you, and chat to you soon.